And welcome to another segment of The Virtual Professor. I'm Dr. Maxine Bryant, and I have the pleasure of coming on this screen on a regular basis to educate, to inform, to inspire you, my listening audience, about things that matter in our country. I try to educate, I try to keep you informed on current events, particularly around criminal justice, but also around social justice. What I am committed to doing is changing society one class at a time. So, in our last segment, we spoke on the Electoral College, and my purpose was just to educate and bring to light some of the hidden things about the Electoral College. I found so much that I decided to do a part two. And so, welcome to part two, where we're going to continue to have a conversation around the Electoral College. Now, I'm going to spend some time today giving you some background about how it started and how it impacts us even today. So, let's go on and get started. There are many who say that the Electoral College is really a type of racial entitlement that leaves out African Americans. So, all along, in terms of the franchisement, there were poll taxes levied against African Americans. There was violence used at voting polls. The voter ID laws are thought to be a type of discouragement for people of color to actually go to the polls and vote. In my research, one of the things I found was that one of the structural and most damaging pieces of entitlement that is used against African Americans traditionally was or is the Electoral College. I was quite surprised to find this. So in my research, one of the things that I found out was that many contemporary commentaries played down the extent to which race and slavery contributed to the framing of not only our U.S. Constitution, but in particular the Electoral College. And so, in effect, because we don't know the truth, history again has been whitewashed. When the framers of the Constitution came up with the idea of the Electoral College, race and slavery were definitely on their minds. So the Electoral College, as I mentioned before, was actually designed to be a type of a check and balance so that potential presidential candidates would not be able just to rally up all of their friends and constituents in the larger states and win just the popular vote. Our framers were concerned about the integrity and the equity of the popular vote. And so the Electoral College then was a type of a compromise. So how did that compromise come to be? So delegates from slaveholding states in the South had another rationale for opposing the popular vote method. Doing so would be to their disadvantage. Now, the northern states and the southern states had roughly around the same amount of people who were eligible to vote, right? However, no, I take that back. Not who were eligible to vote, but had the same amount of people. In the South, 33% of their population did not have voting rights because they were enslaved people. So the southern states then would have less clout in a popular vote type of system that mattered to them. The ultimate system that was decided upon, it was a solution, was to create an indirect method of choosing the president, and that's the Electoral College. And that would leverage, at least for the South, the whole 3/5 of a person thing. Now remember, enslaved people could not be counted as a whole person, particularly when it came to the census and deciding on the number of people who would be counted in the population. Enslaved people were counted as 3/5 of a person, particularly as it related to congressional representation. Now, since congressional seats were levied or divided upon by the population in a state or in a district, what we find is that 93% of the country's slaves were residing in just 5 southern states. And so the South had a major interest in determining ways to maintain their edge. By adding this 3/5 people, if you will, who were slaves, that increased their congressional delegation significantly. And remember, the electoral votes the voters are determined by congressional delegates. So this created then a win-win for the South, so to speak. So another thing I found out is that actually this whole thing about the Electoral College helped to bring Reconstruction to an end. Now, in many of my classes, I talk about how after slavery was abolished, there was a period of 12 years that we have come to know as Reconstruction. During that time, African Americans actually held political office. They ran for Congress. They had seats in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Things were thriving. But not everybody wanted to see that happen. And in 1876, there was a presidential election, and there was a Democrat by the name of Samuel Tilden, who had actually won the popular vote. But there were some electoral votes that were in dispute. And so an ad hoc commission of lawmakers and Supreme Court justices were pulled together to take a look at the matter and kind of resolve the matter, if you will. The contested electoral votes were awarded then to a Republican guy by the name of Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, he had lost the popular vote, but because of the Electoral College and trying to smooth things out, he won the electoral votes. Now, as a part of the agreement, this became known as the Compromise of 1877, the federal government removed the troops that existed in the South after the Civil War that were there to maintain order and protect the Black vote. So as a part of this compromise, those troops then were removed. That particular deal marked the end of Reconstruction and ushered in Jim Crow. And that served as a foothold of white supremacy in voting through the systematic disenfranchisement of Black people for many, many, many years. Right? Now, what that did, it actually helped to accomplish for the next 8 decades what slavery had done the previous 8 decades. And this wrong wasn't really righted until 1965 with the passing of the Voting Rights Act. What I want to remind us, though, is that the struggle for enfranchisement of Blacks isn't over, right? The struggle to continue to keep Blacks disenfranchised remains. And it remains now by way of the criminal justice system. Now, according to the Sentencing Project, 6.1 million people in our country were disenfranchised in the 2016 election because they had a felony history. Over 7% of the adult Black population in our country is disenfranchised. What does that look like? Particularly for Blacks, it's 1 out of every 13 adult Blacks are disenfranchised. That's a lot of folks. So as you may imagine then, felony disenfranchisement is worse in our southern states. So for example, as of 2016, 21% of the voters in Florida were disenfranchised. In Kentucky, 26%. In Tennessee, it was 21%. In Virginia, it was 22%. And a significant number of those who are disenfranchised are, yep, you're right, African Americans. So what does this have to do with the whole topic about electoral voting, the Electoral College? What I want to encourage you is to stay involved, get involved and stay involved. I was kind of hesitant, actually, to talk about the history of the Electoral College because I don't want people to become apathetic. I don't want people to become complacent. I don't want you to land on the notion that your vote does not matter. So here's my challenge to you. How can we turn something around if it's not beneficial for all of us? How can we right some wrongs? How do we impact change? You gotta get involved at your local level. And you gotta encourage and urge other people to do the same. We don't have time to be complacent. We don't have time to be apathetic. And so that's my challenge to you today. Google information. The computer is information at our fingertips. Read credible sites like the Sentencing Project. That's where I got some of my information from that I'm sharing with you today. History.com. If you go to that site and you look up the Electoral College, gives you some interesting tidbits of history about how the Electoral College came to be and the pros and the cons of it now. Even the U.S. House of Representatives has information about the history of the Electoral College on their website. It's called history.house.gov. Get involved. Make a difference. Continue to listen to the virtual professor so that you can be informed, enlightened, and inspired. This is Dr. Maxine Bryant, your virtual professor, and I'm committed to changing society one class at a time.